The crack of gunfire shattered the twilight calm of Riverside, California, as Hannah Harlow stood her ground on the porch of her modest homestead, her children huddled behind her skirts. The year was 1873, and the frontier town that had once promised sanctuary now threatened to take everything she held dear. "Get back inside," she hissed to 8-year-old Thomas and 6-year-old Abigail, her eyes never leaving the 3 riders approaching through the golden haze of dust. Her husband had been dead for 8 months, leaving her with 2 children, a small ranch, and the unwanted attention of land-hungry men who thought a widow would be easy pickings. Hannah's fingers tightened around her husband's old Colt revolver. She'd never fired it at a person before, but tonight she might have to break that streak. The lead rider, Silas Morrow, had been pressuring her to sell the land for months. Now he was done asking nicely. "Mrs. Harlow," Morrow called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "Reconsidered my offer yet? $500 is more than generous for a woman in your position." "My position is just fine, Mr. Morrow," Hannah called back, her voice steadier than her hands. "This land belongs to my children, and I'll thank you to respect that." Morrow's laugh was cold as he dismounted, his boots kicking up dust as he sauntered forward. "A woman alone has no business running a ranch. Be reasonable." "I've got no reason to sell to a man who cheats at cards and business alike," Hannah replied, raising the revolver. "Now kindly get off my property." The air shifted suddenly, and Hannah sensed movement to her right, a 4th rider coming around the side of the house. She'd been outflanked. Fear churned in her stomach, but she kept her expression neutral, refusing to show weakness. "Mama." Abigail whispered behind her. "Stay behind me, sweet pea," Hannah murmured, trying to keep track of all 4 men at once. Morrow's eyes narrowed as he spotted the gun. "That's a mistake, Mrs. Harlow. A big one." His hand moved to his holster. That's when the stranger appeared, as if manifested from the twilight itself. A tall figure on horseback emerged from the nearby stand of cottonwoods, riding slowly but purposefully toward the confrontation. Hannah hadn't noticed him before. He must have been watching from the tree line, assessing the situation. "Evening, gentlemen," the newcomer called out, his voice deep and calm. 4 against 1 seems hardly sporting, especially when that one's a lady with young uns. Morrow turned, irritation flashing across his face. "This isn't your concern, stranger." The rider dismounted with fluid grace. Hannah could see him clearly now, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by sun and wind. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, and the gun at his hip looked like it had seen regular use. Most striking were his eyes, pale blue and alert, missing nothing. "Name's Kieran Galloway," the stranger said, approaching slowly, hands visible. "And I reckon I'm making it my concern." Hannah felt a surge of both relief and worry. She appreciated the intervention, but she didn't need another complication. Men who played hero often expected payment of one kind or another. "We don't need help," she said firmly. "Mr. Morrow was just leaving." Morrow's laugh had an ugly edge. "That's so." His hand moved to his holster again. "What if I'm not ready to leave?" Kieran stepped forward, positioning himself between Hannah and the threat. "Madam, I mean no disrespect, but these men aren't here for a friendly chat." The tension in the air thickened. Hannah could feel her children trembling behind her. Thomas, always the protector despite his young age, stood straighter, trying to appear brave. "Last warning," Hannah said, her voice betraying only a slight tremor. "Get off my property." One of Morrow's men, a wiry fellow with a pockmarked face, spat on the ground. "Boss, we gonna let a woman and some drifter tell us what to do?" What happened next unfolded in heartbeats. Morrow drew his pistol, but before he could aim, Hannah fired a warning shot into the air. The 4th man, who'd circled behind, used the distraction to make his move, raising his gun toward Hannah and the children. Kieran spotted the movement before Hannah did. "Down!" he shouted, lunging forward as the man pulled his trigger. The bullet that was meant for Hannah struck Kieran instead, catching him in the shoulder. Despite the impact, he managed to draw and fire in one fluid motion. His shot found its mark, and the ambusher crumpled to the ground. Hannah reacted instantly, pushing her children through the door before turning her gun on Morrow. "Next one's between your eyes. Take your men and get out." Blood was spreading across Kieran's shirt, but he remained standing, his gun trained steadily on Morrow. The odds had shifted, and Morrow knew it. With a curse, he signaled to his remaining men. "This isn't over, widow," he snarled as they backed toward their horses. "Sure feels over from where I'm standing," Kieran replied, his voice tight with pain but unwavering. Only when the riders had disappeared into the distance did Kieran allow himself to stagger, leaning against the porch railing for support. Hannah hesitated for just a moment before calling to her children. "Thomas, fetch my sewing kit and the whiskey from the top shelf. Abigail, get the clean linens from the trunk. Hurry now." Turning to Kieran, she added, "Let's get you inside before you bleed all over my porch." His smile was strained but genuine. "Yes, madam, wouldn't want to make a mess." Hannah helped him into the house, noting how he tried to minimize his weight against her despite his injury. Once inside, she directed him to a chair by the kitchen table. "You shouldn't have interfered," she said as she helped him remove his jacket, revealing the full extent of the bloodstain. "But I'm grateful you did." "Couldn't just ride past," Kieran replied, wincing as she began examining the wound. "Not with children involved." Hannah worked efficiently, cutting away his shirt to reveal a muscular shoulder marred by the bullet wound. The bullet had gone clean through, which was a blessing. No digging required. "This will hurt," she warned as she poured whiskey over the wound. Kieran hissed but didn't pull away. "Had worse." "I'm sure you have," Hannah replied, threading a needle. "What brings you to Riverside, Mr. Galloway?" "Just passing through," he said, watching her hands work with steady precision. "Was heading north to Sacramento. Got work lined up there." Hannah nodded, focusing on her stitches. "Well, you've earned a place to rest tonight at least, though I'll warn you those men might come back." "All the more reason for me to stay a spell," Kieran said. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or the first flicker of something more. Thomas appeared at Hannah's elbow, watching the procedure with fascination. "Are you a real cowboy, mister?" Kieran smiled, some of the tension easing from his face. "I've been a lot of things, son. Cowboy, soldier, lawman for a spell." "Did it hurt, getting shot?" Thomas asked, earning a scolding Thomas from his mother. "It's all right," Kieran assured Hannah before answering the boy. "Truth be told, it hurts plenty, but not as much as it would have hurt seeing your mama or you kids get harmed." Hannah tied off the last stitch and began bandaging the wound, trying not to notice the warmth of his skin or the way his eyes followed her movements. It had been a long time since she'd been this close to a man, and never one quite like this, a stranger who'd taken a bullet for her family without hesitation. "You've got a steady hand, Mrs. Harlow," Kieran commented as she finished. "Hannah," she corrected, suddenly aware of how intimate the moment felt. "And I've had practice. Ranch life isn't exactly gentle." Abigail, who had been hovering nearby, finally worked up the courage to approach. "Are you going to stay and keep the bad men away?" she asked, her small voice hopeful. Before Kieran could answer, Hannah interjected, "Mr. Galloway is just passing through, Abby. He's got work waiting in Sacramento." "But he's hurt," Abigail protested. "He can't travel now." Hannah couldn't argue with that logic. "He can stay until he's well enough to travel," she conceded. "Now, it's past your bedtime. Both of you wash up and get ready." After the children reluctantly left to prepare for bed, the kitchen fell into silence, broken only by the crackling of the fire in the stove and the distant chorus of crickets outside. "Thank you," Hannah said finally, putting away her supplies. "Those men have been pressuring me for months, but they've never been so bold before." "Land disputes can turn ugly fast," Kieran observed. "Why does Mara want your place so badly?" Hannah sighed, sitting down across from him. "Water rights, mainly. My husband Stuart found a natural spring on our property last year. It's the most reliable water source for miles in the dry season." She glanced toward the window, into the darkness beyond. "We were going to expand, maybe plant an orchard. Then the influenza took him in the winter." "I'm sorry for your loss," Kieran said quietly. Hannah nodded, her eyes distant with memory. 8 months feels like both yesterday and forever ago." She straightened her shoulders, visibly pulling herself back to the present. "Anyway, Morrow's been trying to buy us out ever since. When I refused, he started making trouble diverting our supply deliveries, spreading rumors in town that I'm unfit to run the place alone." "You seem to be managing just fine," Kieran observed. Hannah's smile was tired but proud. "We get by. The children help as much as they can, and I hire the Mendoza boys from the next property over for the heavier work." She paused, studying him. "What about you? You said you've been many things." Kieran leaned back, careful of his injured shoulder. "Grew up on a horse farm in Missouri. Fought for the Union. After the war, I drifted west, worked cattle drives, did some marshaling in Colorado for a while." He smiled slightly. "Nothing seemed to stick. And now Sacramento, lumber companies hiring security. Good pay, steady work." He didn't sound particularly enthusiastic. Hannah raised an eyebrow. "Sounds thrilling." That earned a genuine laugh from Kieran. "It's honest work, that's enough." Hannah stood, suddenly aware of how late it was getting. "You should rest. You can take the spare room tonight. It's small, but the bed's clean." As she showed him to the room, Kieran paused in the doorway. "I'll be gone before those men return. Wouldn't want to bring more trouble to your door." Hannah met his gaze directly. "Mr. Galloway, trouble found us long before you arrived. Get some rest. We can figure out the rest tomorrow." The following morning, Hannah rose before dawn as usual, quietly moving through her chores to avoid waking their guest. She fed the chickens, checked on the milk cow, and had breakfast nearly ready when she heard movement in the spare room. Kieran emerged looking better than she expected, though his face was pale beneath his tan. He'd managed to wash up and had found a clean shirt from his saddlebag. The bandage on his shoulder showed a spot of fresh blood, but not enough to be concerning. "Good morning," Hannah greeted him. "How's the shoulder?" "Stiff but serviceable," he replied, the scent of coffee drawing him toward the stove. "You're up early." "Ranch doesn't run itself," she said, pouring him a cup. "The children will be up soon. There's eggs and bacon almost ready." Kieran accepted the coffee gratefully. "Thank you. I was thinking about your situation with Morrow." Hannah stiffened slightly. "I've been handling it." "No doubt," Kieran said carefully. "But men like that don't typically back down easy, especially not after being publicly challenged." Before Hannah could respond, thundering footsteps announced the children's arrival. Thomas skidded into the kitchen first, his face lighting up when he saw Kieran. "You're still here," he exclaimed. "Can I see your gun? Do you have a horse? Have you ever been in a real shootout?" "Thomas," Hannah admonished, "let Mr. Galloway breathe." Kieran chuckled. "It's all right." "Yes to all three, young man, though the gun showing will have to wait for your mother's permission." Breakfast was a livelier affair than the Harlow household had seen in months. The children peppered Kieran with questions, and to Hannah's surprise, he answered with patient good humor, neither talking down to them nor glorifying the rougher aspects of frontier life. As they finished eating, Hannah outlined the day's tasks. Thomas, you'll need to check the chicken coop for eggs and make sure the fence is secure. Abigail, you're on garden duty. Those beans need picking before they get too tough. What about Mr. Galloway? Abigail asked. He should rest his shoulder. Hannah glanced at their guest. Mr. Galloway will be doing exactly that. Actually, Kieran interjected, I thought I might take a look at that problem with your barn door. Noticed it was hanging crooked when I put my horse up last night. Hannah started to protest, but Kieran continued, light work only, I promise. Doctor's orders say some movement is good for healing. I don't recall appointing you a doctor, Hannah said dryly, but relented. Fine, but don't overdo it. As the morning progressed, Hannah found herself continually glancing toward the barn, where Kieran was indeed fixing the door, working methodically despite his injury. There was something reassuring about having a man around the place again, not that she'd admit it aloud. She'd worked too hard to establish her independence. Around midday, the sound of approaching horses put everyone on alert. Hannah grabbed her rifle and hurried to the porch, but relaxed when she saw it was just Sheriff Donovan with Deputy Ellis. Mrs. Harlow, the sheriff called out as he dismounted. Heard there was some trouble out here yesterday evening. Kieran emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. The sheriff's eyes narrowed as he assessed the stranger. And you are? Donovan asked. Kieran Galloway, he replied, approaching with his hand extended. Just passing through. The sheriff shook his hand but remained guarded. Passing through with a bullet wound from what I hear. Bartender at the saloon says Morrow's man Jenkins came in last night bleeding and cursing about a shootout at the Harlow place. Hannah stepped forward. Sheriff, Mr. Morrow and his men came onto my property armed and threatening. Mr. Galloway intervened when they tried to shoot me and my children. Donovan's expression softened slightly. That true, Galloway? Yes, sir. Self-defense clear as day. They had her outnumbered 4-1. The deputy, a young man who'd always been sweet on Hannah, looked concerned. You all right, Mrs. Harlow? The children? We're fine, Deputy Ellis, thank you. Hannah gestured toward the house. Would you gentlemen like some coffee while we discuss this? Inside, Hannah recounted the previous evening's events while Kieran occasionally added details. Sheriff Donovan listened thoughtfully, making notes in a small book. Morrow's been pushing his luck lately, Donovan admitted when she finished. But he's got connections with the railroad investors, so the mayor tells me to tread carefully. So he gets to threaten a widow and her children with impunity, Kieran asked, a edge to his voice. I didn't say that, Donovan replied sharply, but I need more than just your word against his. Hannah leaned forward. What about Jenkins? You said he was injured. That confirms our story. Claims he was jumped by robbers on the road, the deputy supplied. Morrow's backing his tail. Kieran shook his head in disgust. Convenient. The sheriff stood, replacing his hat. I'll keep an eye on Morrow, Mrs. Harlow. In the meantime, I suggest you be careful. He glanced at Kieran. Both of you. After the lawman departed, Hannah stood on the porch, watching them ride away with a troubled expression. He's not going to help, is he? She asked when Kieran joined her. Not directly, Kieran confirmed, but at least he's warned. If Morrow makes another move, the sheriff can't claim ignorance. Hannah sighed, pushing a stray lock of hair from her face. I never wanted this fight. All I want is to raise my children in peace on the land their father loved. Kieran was quiet for a moment before saying, Sometimes peace has to be fought for. Their eyes met, and Hannah felt that same strange connection from the night before, a sense of understanding that went beyond words. Quickly, she looked away. I should check on the children, she said, suddenly needing distance from the intensity of his gaze. The rest of the day passed in a rhythm of chores and quiet conversation. Despite her initial reservations, Hannah found Kieran's presence oddly comforting. He worked alongside her without overstepping, offering help without assuming control. By sunset, the barn door was fixed, the vegetable garden weeded, and even the leaky roof over the kitchen had been patched. After the children were asleep, Hannah found Kieran on the porch, looking out at the star-filled sky. She brought out 2 cups of tea and handed him one. "Thank you," he said, accepting it. "Beautiful night." "It is," Hannah agreed, settling into the chair beside him. "Stuart and I used to sit out here in the evenings. He knew all the constellations, would make up stories about them for the children. He sounds like a good man. The best," Hannah said softly. "Stubborn as a mule but kind." She smiled at a memory. "He courted me for 2 years before I agreed to marry him. My father thought he was too reckless, too full of dreams about the West. Turned out he was right about that part." "Do you regret coming out here?" Kieran asked. Hannah considered the question. "No," she said finally. "It's been hard, especially since Stuart passed, but this is home now. The children are happy here. They have space to run, to grow. In Philadelphia, they'd be crammed into some narrow townhouse, breathing coal smoke and factory fumes." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping their tea and watching the stars. Eventually, Hannah asked the question that had been on her mind. "How long will your shoulder keep you from traveling?" Kieran glanced at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Doctor's orders say at least a week," he said with a hint of humor. "Though I reckon the doctor might be a bit cautious." Hannah smiled despite herself. "The doctor sounds very wise. You shouldn't argue with her." "Wouldn't dream of it," Kieran replied, and the warmth in his voice made her heart beat a little faster. The week that followed established a new routine at the Harlow ranch. Kieran proved himself useful despite his injury, helping with repairs that Hannah had been putting off for months. The children adored him, especially Thomas, who shadowed him constantly, absorbing every bit of knowledge Kieran shared about horses, tracking, and the workings of the world beyond Riverside. Hannah found herself watching their interactions with mixed emotions. It was good for Thomas to have a male figure to look up to, but she worried about the inevitable disappointment when Kieran left. Yet as the days passed, she noticed subtle changes in Kieran himself, the haunted look in his eyes softening, his smiles coming more readily, his shoulders losing some of their perpetual tension. On the 5th day, Hannah returned from town with supplies to find Kieran teaching the children how to fish in the creek that ran through the property. They were laughing, Abigail's blonde curls bouncing as she tried to mimic Kieran's casting technique. The scene made Hannah's chest tighten with an emotion she wasn't ready to name. That evening, after the children were asleep, Kieran helped Hannah sort through the supplies she'd purchased. "Heard some news in town," Hannah said as she stored flour in the pantry. "Morrow's called in some professional muscle from San Francisco, a gunman named Clayton." Kieran's hands stilled on the burlap sack he was untying. "Bart Clayton?" Hannah looked up sharply. "You know him?" "By reputation," Kieran said grimly. "He's not just a gunman. He's a killer who enjoys his work. If Morrow's hired Clayton, he's done playing games." Hannah sat down heavily. "What am I supposed to do against someone like that? I can't put the children at risk." "You could sell," Kieran suggested gently. "Take the money and start over somewhere else." "Run, you mean," Hannah said, anger flaring. "Let them win through intimidation and threats. Living is winning, Hannah." She shook her head firmly. "This land is my children's legacy. It's all they have left of their father. I won't surrender it to bullies." She met his gaze directly. "But I understand if you need to move on. Your shoulder's healing well and you've done more than enough already." Kieran was quiet for a long moment before he spoke. "Clayton's expected when? Day after tomorrow, according to what I overheard." Kieran nodded, decision made. Then we have a day to prepare. Hannah blinked. Unless you'd prefer I leave, Kieran said, his expression serious but his eyes holding something that made her breath catch. No, she said quietly. I wouldn't. The next day was devoted to preparations. Kieran rode the property boundaries with Thomas, identifying vulnerable approaches and planning defenses. Hannah cleaned and oiled every weapon on the ranch, including the rifle that had been Stuart's pride and joy. Together, they decided the children would stay with the Mendoza family until the situation was resolved, despite Thomas's vehement protests. As evening fell, Hannah found herself unusually restless. After checking on the sleeping children one last time, she went to find Kieran. He was in the barn, examining his saddle by lantern light. "Can't sleep?" he asked without looking up. "Too much on my mind," Hannah admitted, leaning against the stable door. "What about you?" "Just making sure everything's in order." He straightened, wincing slightly as his shoulder protested. Hannah moved closer. "Let me check your bandage." Kieran submitted to her examination without protest, unbuttoning his shirt enough to expose the wound. It was healing well, the angry redness faded to pink. "You're lucky," Hannah murmured, her fingers gentle on his skin. "An inch to the left and it would have been much worse." "I've always had good fortune," Kieran replied, his voice low. When Hannah looked up, she found his face closer than expected, his eyes intense in the lantern light. Time seemed to suspend as they stood there, the air between them charged with unspoken possibilities. Hannah wasn't sure who moved first, but suddenly his hand was cradling her face, and she was leaning into his touch, all the barriers she'd built since Stuart's death crumbling in an instant. The kiss was gentle at first, hesitant, both of them conscious of crossing a threshold. Then Hannah's arms went around his neck, and Kieran pulled her closer, the kiss deepening into something urgent and needful. Years of loneliness and grief melted away beneath the heat of his touch. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "I wasn't planning on this," he confessed. "When I rode onto your land that day, I was just passing through." "And now?" Hannah asked, her heart racing. Kieran's smile was tender as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Now I'm finding it hard to imagine riding away." The confession hung between them, full of promise and complication. Hannah knew she should be cautious, should guard her heart and her children's from potential disappointment. But standing in Kieran's arms, she felt something she hadn't felt since Stuart died: hope. "We should get some rest," she said finally, though she made no move to leave his embrace. "Tomorrow will be challenging enough without exhaustion." Kieran nodded, pressing one more gentle kiss to her lips before stepping back. "I'll walk you to the house." That night, despite the danger looming on the horizon, Hannah slept more soundly than she had in months, her dreams for once free of fear and loss. Morning brought with it clear skies and the bittersweet task of sending the children to the Mendoza farm. Thomas was especially resistant. "I can help," he insisted, his small face serious. "Papa taught me to shoot." Hannah knelt before him, taking his hands in hers. "I know you're brave, Thomas. But I need you to be brave by watching over Abby. Can you do that for me?" Reluctantly, he nodded. As Manuel Mendoza loaded the children's small bags into his wagon, Abigail clung to Kieran's leg. "You'll protect Mama?" she asked, her blue eyes wide with worry. Kieran crouched down to her level, despite the twinge in his shoulder. "With everything I have," he promised solemnly, "and you'll be back home before you know it." Watching the wagon disappear down the road, Hannah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Her children were safe, but the coming confrontation now seemed more real. "We should get ready," Kieran said softly, his hand finding hers. Clayton will likely come at noon. Men like him have a flair for dramatics. They spent the morning making final preparations. Hannah changed into practical trousers beneath her skirt, something she only did for the most strenuous ranch work, and checked her weapons one last time. Kieran moved hay bales to create defensive positions and unsaddled his horse, letting it into the corral with Hannah's animals. No quick getaways? Hannah asked, watching him. No running, Kieran replied simply. By 11 they were ready as they could be. They sat together on the porch, rifles within reach but not obviously displayed. Hannah had made coffee and they sipped it in companionable silence, watching the road. "Tell me about Sacramento," Hannah said eventually. "What's the lumber company like?" "Honestly, I've never seen it," Kieran admitted. "Just heard they were hiring from a fellow I met in Stockton." Hannah raised an eyebrow. "So no job actually waiting?" "There's work for a man willing to do it," Kieran said with a shrug. "Always is." "And what kind of work do you prefer?" Hannah asked, genuinely curious. "When you're not rescuing widows from land grabbers." Kieran considered the question. "I liked working with horses back before the war. There's a honesty to them, no pretense, no deceit." He smiled slightly. "And I enjoyed the peace of it, just man and beast and open country." Hannah nodded, understanding. "Stuart felt the same way. It's why we came west. He said a man could breathe out here." "Smart man," Kieran agreed, his eyes drifting to the horizon. "Hannah, I need to tell you something before Clayton arrives." The seriousness in his tone made her turn to face him fully. "What is it?" "If things go badly," Kieran began, choosing his words carefully, "there's a map in my saddlebag. It shows the location of some money I've saved over the years. It's not much, but it would get you and the children to San Francisco, maybe set up a small business there." Hannah's throat tightened with emotion. "Nothing's going to go badly," she insisted, though they both knew it was a hope rather than a certainty. Kieran took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Just in case," he said softly. "Promise me you'll use it if needed." "Only if you promise to stick around long enough to show me where it is yourself," Hannah countered, blinking back unexpected tears. Their eyes locked, and Kieran's expression softened. "I promise to try my damnedest." The sound of approaching horses interrupted the moment. Hannah tensed, reaching for her rifle, but Kieran put a restraining hand on her arm. "Not yet," he murmured. "Let them make the first move." 4 riders appeared on the road, moving unhurriedly toward the ranch. Morrow was in the lead, with Jenkins and another of his regular men flanking him. The 4th rider, slightly behind, was a stranger, a lean man with a neat black mustache and expensive clothes that seemed out of place on the dusty trail. "Clayton," Kieran confirmed in a low voice. "Remember what we discussed. I'll handle him if possible." The riders stopped in the yard. Morrow dismounted first, a false smile plastered on his face. "Mrs. Harlow, beautiful day, isn't it?" he called out as if they were old friends meeting for tea. "I see you've still got company." Hannah stood, her posture straight and proud. "Mr. Morrow, I believe I made my position clear the last time you visited. This land is not for sale." Morrow's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. "Circumstances change, my dear. I've brought an associate who's very persuasive." He gestured to the well-dressed man, who remained mounted, watching the exchange with cold detachment. Kieran rose to stand beside Hannah. "Bart Clayton," he said, his voice carrying across the yard. "Still doing Judah's work for 30 pieces of silver." Clayton's expression registered surprise, then recognition. Well, Kieran Galloway, heard you'd gone soft after Colorado." His smile was razor thin. "Seems the rumors were right if you're playing house with a widow." Hannah felt Kieran tense beside her but admired how his voice remained steady. "Why don't we cut through the pleasantries, Clayton? You and Morrow are trespassing." Again, Morrow's fake cordiality vanished. "This is your last chance, Mrs. Harlow. $500 and you walk away clean. Otherwise," he shrugged, letting the threat hang unspoken. "Otherwise what?" Hannah challenged. "You'll gun down a woman on her own property. Even in Riverside, that might be a step too far for the law to ignore." Clayton finally dismounted, his movements fluid and unhurried. "No one's talking about gunning anyone down," he said smoothly. "Accidents happen all the time on these isolated ranches, fires especially. Tragic, but not suspicious." The threat sent ice through Hannah's veins, but she kept her expression neutral. "Sheriff Donovan is aware of the situation, Mr. Clayton. He's expecting to hear from me this evening." "Sheriffs can be reasonable men when approached correctly," Clayton replied with a smirk. "Especially with witnesses confirming how the tragic accident occurred." Kieran stepped forward, putting himself slightly ahead of Hannah. "Enough talk. You're not getting this land and you're not threatening this family anymore. Mount up and ride out or this ends badly for you." Clayton's hand hovered near his holster. "You always were direct, Galloway. It's why you never made it to the top of our profession. No finesse." Hannah realized with sudden clarity that these men had history and not just casual acquaintance. The way they watched each other, assessed and calculated, spoke of professional familiarity. "You were a gunman," she said quietly to Kieran, the pieces falling into place. "Among other things," Kieran replied without taking his eyes off Clayton. "Not my proudest chapter." Clayton laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "Don't let him fool you, Mrs. Harlow. Your protector was once the fastest gun in 3 territories. Left quite a trail of bodies before he supposedly found his conscience." "That's enough," Kieran said sharply. "This is your last warning. Leave." Morrow, growing impatient, interrupted. "For God's sake, Clayton, earn your money. They're just a crippled gunslinger and a woman." The tension ratcheted higher. Hannah could feel the situation balancing on a knife's edge. Her hand inched toward the rifle leaning against the porch railing. What happened next unfolded with breathtaking speed. Clayton made his move, his hand darting toward his gun with practiced precision. But Kieran was already in motion, shoving Hannah down behind the porch railing as he drew his own weapon. Gunfire erupted, deafening in the clear air. Hannah recovered quickly, grabbing her rifle and firing at Jenkins, who was attempting to circle around to the side of the house. Her shot caught him in the leg, sending him tumbling from his horse with a howl of pain. Through the haze of gunsmoke, she saw Kieran and Clayton locked in a lethal dance, each seeking cover while trying to get a clean shot at the other. Morrow had retreated behind his horse, firing wildly toward the porch. His third man was already down, clutching a bleeding shoulder. "Hannah, stay down," Kieran shouted, ducking behind a water trough as bullets splintered the wood around him. But Hannah had spotted Morrow attempting to work his way toward the barn, using the chaos as cover. If he reached it, he'd have a clear shot at the house. She raised her rifle, took careful aim, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck the ground near Morrow's feet, sending him scrambling back with a curse. Clayton, seeing his employer's retreat, called out, "Finish it, Morrow, the barn." Hannah realized with horror what they intended not just to wound or kill, but to destroy the ranch itself. If they couldn't have it, they'd make sure no one did. She turned to warn Kieran just as Clayton broke cover, firing rapidly. Kieran spun, returning fire with deadly accuracy. Clayton staggered, a look of surprise crossing his face as crimson bloomed on his expensive shirt. But his aim had been true as well. Kieran dropped to one knee, his left side dark with fresh blood. "Kieran!" Hannah cried, instinct driving her toward him despite the danger. In that moment of distraction, Morrow made his move, charging toward the barn with a torch he'd hastily assembled from a branch and his kerchief, soaked in lamp oil from his saddlebag. The dry hay inside would catch like tinder, and with the wind blowing toward the house, the flames would spread quickly. Hannah had to make a choice: help Kieran or stop Morrow. With a silent prayer, she turned and ran toward the barn, firing her rifle from the hip as she moved. Her first shot missed, but the second caught Morrow in the shoulder, spinning him around. The torch fell from his grasp, landing in the dust. Morrow recovered quickly, drawing his pistol with his good arm. "You bitch," he snarled, taking aim. Hannah froze, suddenly aware she'd left herself exposed. Time seemed to slow as she watched Morrow's finger tighten on the trigger. This was it after everything, after surviving loss and hardship and previous attacks. She was about to die in her own yard. The shot that rang out didn't come from Morrow's gun. It came from behind her, where Kieran had somehow found the strength to stand, his pistol extended despite his wound. Morrow crumpled, his unfired weapon falling from lifeless fingers. Hannah whirled to see Kieran collapse again, his strength spent. She rushed to his side, panic rising as she saw the extent of his wounds. The bullet had caught him in the side, below the ribs. "Hold on," she pleaded, pressing her hands against the wound to slow the bleeding. "Just hold on, Kieran." His eyes, clouded with pain, found hers. "The others?" He managed to ask. "Down or fled?" Hannah assured him, glancing around the now quiet yard. Clayton lay motionless near the water trough. Jenkins was trying to drag himself toward his horse with his injured leg, and Morrow's third man had apparently fled during the chaos. "Need to get you inside," Hannah said, trying to help Kieran to his feet. He was heavy, but adrenaline gave her strength. Together, they staggered toward the house, leaving a trail of blood across the yard. Once inside, Hannah helped him onto her bed. It was closer than the spare room, and she needed to work quickly. Cutting away his shirt revealed 2 wounds, the fresh one in his side, still bleeding freely, and his partially healed shoulder wound which had reopened during the fight. "This is becoming a habit," Kieran said weakly, attempting humor despite his pallor. "Hush," Hannah replied, gathering supplies with shaking hands. "Save your strength." Working as quickly as precision would allow, Hannah cleaned and dressed both wounds. The side injury was serious, but the bullet had passed through cleanly, missing vital organs. Still, he'd lost a lot of blood, and infection was a constant danger on the frontier. "I need to get the doctor," Hannah said as she finished bandaging him. "And the sheriff." Kieran's hand caught hers, his grip surprisingly strong despite his weakness. "The yard first," he insisted. "Make sure they're gone. Take my gun." Hannah nodded, understanding his concern. Grabbing Kieran's pistol, she cautiously returned to the porch. The scene was much as they'd left it: Clayton dead, Morrow dead. But Jenkins was gone, having apparently managed to mount up and flee despite his injury. After securing the property as best she could, Hannah hitched the wagon with trembling hands. She hated to leave Kieran alone, but she needed help, professional medical help that went beyond her limited knowledge of bullet wounds and stitches. "I'll be back as soon as I can," she promised, pressing a kiss to Kieran's forehead. "Don't you dare die while I'm gone." His smile was faint but determined. "Not planning on it, madam." The journey to town was the longest of Hannah's life. Each jolt of the wagon wheels imagined as another moment Kieran might be slipping away. When she finally reached Dr. Morgan's house, she didn't bother with social niceties, pounding on his door despite the late hour. "Mrs. Harlow," the doctor said, blinking in surprise as he opened the door. His confusion turned to alarm as he took in her blood-stained clothes and wild expression. "Good heavens, are you injured?" "Not me," Hannah said breathlessly. "Please, I need you to come to the ranch right away. A man's been shot, it's bad." To his credit, Dr. Morgan asked no further questions, simply grabbing his medical bag and following her to the wagon. "I'll need details on the way," he said as they set off. "And we should alert the sheriff." "We'll pass his office," Hannah agreed, snapping the reins to urge the horses faster. "Morrow and his hired gun tried to take my ranch by force. There are 2 dead men in my yard, Doctor. One of them is Silas Morrow." Morgan's eyebrows shot up, but he merely nodded. "I suspected that man would come to a bad end. And the injured man, Kieran Galloway," Hannah replied, her voice softening despite her anxiety. "He saved my life, twice now." When they reached the sheriff's office, Hannah gave a hasty account to a sleep-rumpled Deputy Ellis, who promised to wake the sheriff and follow them out to the ranch immediately. Then they were moving again, racing against time and blood loss. Back at the ranch, they found Kieran conscious but weaker, his skin clammy with shock. Dr. Morgan set to work immediately, his skilled hands moving with efficiency born of decades treating frontier injuries. "You're lucky, Mr. Galloway," the doctor commented as he worked. "An inch to the right, and we'd be having a very different conversation." "So I've been told," Kieran replied weakly, his eyes finding Hannah's across the room. "Seems to be my specialty lately." Hannah hovered nearby, passing instruments and supplies as needed, refusing to leave Kieran's side even when the sheriff arrived to take her statement. She gave her account in terse sentences, never taking her eyes off the man fighting for his life in her bed. Dawn was breaking when Dr. Morgan finally straightened, wiping his hands on a towel. "I've done what I can," he told Hannah privately. "The rest is up to him and God. He's strong and the wounds themselves aren't mortal if infection doesn't set in, but he's lost a lot of blood." Hannah nodded, exhaustion and relief making her light-headed. "Thank you, doctor. What do I need to do?" Morgan gave her detailed instructions for caring for the wounds, administering the laudanum he left for pain, and watching for signs of infection. "I'll return tomorrow to check on him," he promised. "In the meantime, he needs rest and fluids, broth, tea, water, whatever he can keep down." After the doctor left, Sheriff Donovan approached Hannah on the porch where she'd stepped out for a moment of fresh air. The bodies had been removed, loaded into a wagon for transport to town, but dark stains still marred the earth where men had fallen. "This is a mess, Mrs. Harlow," the sheriff said bluntly. 2 prominent men dead, including Morrow, who had powerful friends. Hannah straightened her shoulders, too tired and worried to be diplomatic. "They came to kill us and burn my ranch, Sheriff. It's all there in the evidence, the torch, the threats, the fact that they shot first. Kieran nearly died protecting me and my property." Donovan sighed, rubbing his mustache. "I believe you, especially with Clayton involved. That man's reputation speaks for itself." He glanced toward the house. "Your friend in there, he handled himself remarkably well for a man already nursing 1 bullet wound, almost like he'd done it before." Hannah met his gaze steadily. "Is there a question in there, Sheriff?" After a moment, Donovan shook his head. "No, madam, not today." He replaced his hat, tipping it slightly. "I'll be back for a more formal statement when Mr. Galloway is able. In the meantime, Deputy Ellis will stay here until your children return. Just as a precaution, in case Jenkins gets any ideas about revenge." Hannah thanked him, relieved by the offer of protection she hadn't needed to request. As the sheriff rode away, she returned to Kieran's side, settling into the chair beside the bed for what promised to be a long vigil. The next 3 days blurred together in Hannah's memory, afterward endless hours of changing bandages, coaxing broth between Kieran's pale lips, battling the fever that inevitably came, and praying more fervently than she had since Stuart's final days. Deputy Ellis proved himself useful beyond security, fetching water, chopping wood, and handling the basic animal care so Hannah could focus entirely on her patient. On the second day, Manuel Mendoza brought the children back, having heard about the confrontation from the sheriff. Hannah was torn between joy at seeing them and worry about exposing them to Kieran's precarious condition. "Is he going to die, Mama?" Thomas asked bluntly after being allowed a brief visit to the sickroom. The boy's face was solemn, his eyes too old for his young years. "Not if I have anything to say about it," Hannah replied with more confidence than she felt. "Mr. Galloway is very strong. He has to live," Abigail declared with childish certainty. "He promised to teach me to fish properly." Hannah hugged her daughter close. "Then we'll just have to remind him of that promise." On the third night, when the fever finally broke, Hannah wept with relief, her head bowed over Kieran's hand clasped in hers. She must have fallen asleep in that position, because the next thing she knew, sunlight was streaming through the window, and Kieran's fingers were gently stroking her hair. "Good morning," he said, his voice raspy but clear. Hannah lifted her head, blinking sleep from her eyes. "You're awake," she said unnecessarily, a smile blooming on her exhausted face. "Seems so," Kieran agreed, his own smile weaker but genuine. "Thanks to you, I'd wager." "Dr. Morgan did the hard part," Hannah demurred, but she couldn't hide her joy at seeing lucidity return to his eyes. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of buffalo," Kieran admitted, "but alive, definitely alive." His expression grew serious. "The children, are they safe?" "They're fine," Hannah assured him, touched by his concern. Back home and driving poor Deputy Ellis to distraction with questions about his badge, Kieran relaxed visibly. "And Morrow's men?" "Morrow and Clayton are dead. Jenkins fled but was caught trying to leave the county. He's in jail now, facing charges." Hannah squeezed his hand. "It's over, Kieran." Truly over. His relief was palpable. "Good," he murmured, eyes drifting closed again as exhaustion claimed him, but his hand remained firmly clasped around hers, a silent promise. Recovery was slow but steady. By the end of the week, Kieran was able to sit up in bed for short periods. By the second week, he could make it to the porch with Hannah's support, where he would sit in the sunshine, regaining strength while watching the children play in the yard. News of the confrontation spread quickly through Riverside and beyond. To Hannah's surprise, public opinion largely favored her side of the story. Morrow, it seemed, had made many enemies with his aggressive business tactics, and few mourned his passing. Even more surprising were the visitors who came to the ranch, neighbors Hannah barely knew, bringing food, offers of help with chores, and thinly veiled curiosity about the man who had stood against Morrow and his hired gun. "You're becoming quite the local celebrity," Hannah teased Kieran one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "Not my intention," Kieran replied with a wry smile. "I prefer a quieter existence." Hannah studied his profile, noting how the haggard look of illness was gradually giving way to his natural vigor. "What kind of existence are you planning once you're fully recovered?" she asked, trying to keep her tone casual despite the weight of the question. Kieran turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "That depends," he said carefully. "On what?" "On whether there might be a place for me here," he replied, his voice low. "With you and the children." Hannah's heart stuttered. "I thought you had work waiting in Sacramento." "I told you there was no specific job," Kieran reminded her. "Just a direction I was heading because I needed to head somewhere." He took her hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her skin. "But I've found something better than just somewhere to be. I've found somewhere to belong, if you'll have me." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning and possibility. Hannah looked out at the land she'd fought so hard to keep, the land that was her children's legacy and her own hard-won independence. Then she looked back at Kieran, whose arrival had changed everything. "The children adore you," she said softly. "And I them," Kieran replied. "But that's not what I'm asking, Hannah." Hannah took a deep breath. "I never expected to feel this way again," she admitted. "After Stuart died, I thought that part of my life was over. I had to be mother and father both, had to be strong for Thomas and Abigail. There wasn't room for anything else." She met his gaze directly. "Until you took a bullet meant for me, and then another, and somehow found your way into a heart I thought was closed for good." Kieran's smile was tender as he lifted a hand to cup her cheek. "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes," Hannah confirmed, leaning into his touch. "But on one condition." "Name it." "No more gunfights," she said firmly. "I can't go through that again, Kieran. Watching you bleed, not knowing if you'd live or die, it was too much." Kieran nodded solemnly. "I hung up my gun belt long before I met you, Hannah. Colorado was the end of that life for me. What happened here was necessity, not choice." His expression softened. "All I want now is peace, working this land with you, watching those children grow, building something that matters." Hannah believed him. The man before her wasn't the gunslinger Clayton had described, nor merely the drifter who had happened upon her ranch that fateful evening. He was someone who had seen darkness and chosen light, who had found in her family the home he'd been seeking without knowing it. "Then yes," she said again, more firmly this time. "There's a place for you here, Kieran Galloway, a very important place." Their kiss sealed the promise, tender and hopeful in the fading light. The wedding was a simple affair, held 6 weeks later when Kieran had regained most of his strength. The entire town seemed to attend, curious to witness the union of the widow who had defied Sela's morrow and the mysterious stranger who had helped her save her ranch. Judge Thompson performed the ceremony in the churchyard, with Thomas proudly standing as Kieran's best man and Abigail scattering wildflower petals with solemn concentration. Hannah wore a dress of pale blue, not the traditional white of a first-time bride, but a color that matched the sky above Riverside and complemented the new silver threads that stress had woven into her chestnut hair. "Do you, Kieran James Galloway, take Hannah Marie Harlow to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the judge asked, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "I do," Kieran replied, his eyes never leaving Hannah's face. "And do you, Hannah Marie Harlow, take Kieran James Galloway to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Hannah said, her voice clear and certain. As they exchanged rings, simple bands purchased with some of the money from Kieran's mysterious savings, Hannah felt the final pieces of her new life falling into place. The ranch would prosper with another pair of capable hands to work it. The children would have the father figure they needed. And she would have a partner to share both burdens and joys. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the judge declared. "You may kiss your bride." Kieran's kiss was gentle but full of promise, hinting at the private celebrations to come. When they turned to face the crowd, Hannah was surprised to see genuine happiness on the faces of their neighbors. Riverside had accepted them, accepted this unlikely union born of violence but built on hope. The reception that followed was hosted at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard where blood had been spilled just months before. Now that same ground supported feasting and dancing, laughter and music. Life continuing, as it always did on the frontier, hardship giving way to joy, endings becoming beginnings. As twilight fell, lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the celebration. Hannah found a moment alone with her new husband, both of them watching as Thomas attempted to teach Abigail a clumsy version of the Virginia reel. "Happy?" Kieran asked, his arm around her waist. Happier than I thought possible, Hannah admitted. A year ago, I was just surviving, Kieran. Now I feel like I'm living again. He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. We've earned it, both of us. Later that night, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep, Hannah and Kieran stood on the porch where they had shared so many conversations, now as husband and wife. The future stretched before them, not guaranteed to be easy, but certain to be faced together. "What do you think Stuart would make of all this?" Kieran asked quietly, voicing the question Hannah had often pondered herself. She considered it carefully, honoring the memory of her first love while embracing her second. "I think he'd be glad," she said finally. "Stuart always wanted me to be happy, to be safe, to have someone to share the load." She smiled up at her new husband. "He'd approve of you, I think, especially the part where you saved his children." Kieran nodded, understanding the importance of acknowledging the past while moving forward. "Then I'll do my best to be worthy of his approval," he promised. "And yours." As they stood together under the star-filled sky, Hannah felt a sense of completion she had not expected to find again. The bullet that had been meant for her had brought her not death, but new life, a second chance at love, at family, at building the future Stuart had dreamed of for this land. 10 years later, the Galloway Ranch was one of the most prosperous in the county. The natural spring that Morrow had coveted now supported not just their own livestock, but an orchard that produced the finest apples in 3 counties. The small 2-bedroom house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, in addition to Thomas and Abigail, now 18 and 16. There were 7-year-old twins James and Sarah, named for Kieran's father and Hannah's mother. Thomas, showing his father's gift with horses, had started a small breeding operation on the property, focusing on sturdy, intelligent mounts suited for the rugged California terrain. Abigail, much to Hannah's amusement, had developed an interest in medicine after watching Dr. Morgan tend to Kieran all those years ago. The doctor, now in his 70s, had taken her on as an unofficial apprentice, teaching her the basics of frontier healing. Kieran had kept his promise. He had never again strapped on a gun belt for anything more dangerous than hunting or protecting the livestock from predators. The man who had once been known for his fast draw was now better known for his fair dealing and steady presence. When Riverside formed its first town council 3 years earlier, Kieran had been elected despite his protests that he was just a rancher. Hannah, watching her husband teach their twins to fish in the same creek where he had once taught Thomas and Abigail, reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought them to this point. The bullet that should have ended one life had instead created an entire family's worth of new beginnings. "Mama, look," Sarah called, holding up a wriggling fish nearly as long as her arm. "I caught it all by myself. Very impressive," Hannah called back with a smile. "Bigger than your brother's, I think." James made a face at his sister, but couldn't hide his pride when his own line suddenly went taut. "I got one too." Kieran, supervising both children with the patience he brought to all his interactions with them, caught Hannah's eye and smiled that same warm smile that still made her heart beat faster after a decade of marriage. Later, as they prepared dinner together, a family affair with everyone assigned tasks according to age and ability, Hannah found herself overwhelmed with gratitude for the fullness of her life. The kitchen echoed with laughter and squabbling, with stories of the day's adventures and plans for tomorrow. "You're quiet," Kieran observed as they washed dishes side by side after the meal, the children dispatched to their evening chores. "Everything all right?" Hannah nodded, leaning against his solid presence. "Just thinking about how different things might have been," she admitted. "If you hadn't come along that day, if you hadn't stayed." Kieran set down the plate he was drying and turned to face her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. At 45, his hair was salted with gray, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, but he was still the most handsome man she'd ever known. "I think about that too," he confessed. "Not just what might have happened to you and the children, but what would have become of me." He shook his head slightly. "I was drifting, Hannah, moving without purpose, running from a past I couldn't change. You gave me a future worth building." Hannah stretched up to kiss him, a gesture as natural as breathing after years together. "We gave each other a future," she corrected. "And I wouldn't change a moment of it." Outside, the sun was setting over the land they had defended and nurtured together, casting long shadows across the yard where children played and horses grazed. Inside, the home they had built hummed with life and love, a testament to the power of second chances and the strength found in choosing each other, day after day, through all the challenges the frontier could present. The bullet that had been meant for Hannah had brought her Kieran instead. And from that moment of violence had bloomed a peace more profound than either of them could have imagined, a peace built on shared purpose, mutual respect, and a love that had only deepened with the passing years. As night fell over the Galloway ranch, the family gathered on the porch that had witnessed so many pivotal moments in their shared history. Thomas with his plans for expanding the horse breeding business, Abigail with her stories of helping Dr. Morgan set a broken arm, the twins with their endless questions about everything under the sun. And at the center of it all, Hannah and Kieran, still finding new reasons to be grateful for that fateful day when a stranger had ridden onto a widow's ranch and changed everything.